When I was 16, I was absolutely horrified at the thought that I might, it's like, God, what have you done to me? Now I'm going to be this ostracised thing.
Some of them say that we're sick, we're crazy, and some of them think that we are the most gorgeous, special things on earth.
Since launching his campaign, former President Donald Trump has targeted LGBTQ people, transgender people.
What if I really was someone else? Very far away on the other side of a television screen.
Like, oh, I think I'm queer, and this is an experience that I'm experiencing for the first time. And
for a company to hire a trans person and then not publicly stand by them is worse, in my opinion, than not hiring a trans person at all.
I love this country so much. I just don't know if it loves me back right now.
At first, I thought that it was a phase, just a fun thing that would eventually go away. But I guess what I've realized is that I am gay.
I'm a homosexual! I'm a homosexual!
Hi, my name is Julia, and I would define myself as a lesbian. I generally use the pronouns she and her, but I've spent a lifetime of being called he and him and all that sort of thing. And non-binary wasn't really a thing when I first was coming out. Well, I hadn't heard of it at all, actually. Okay, so coming out, that was a little bit complex. The first time it clicked with me that I might be gay was when I was about 16, and I saw somebody at school with their boyfriend, and I realised I was jealous, and then suddenly it hit me that I wasn't jealous of the person having a boyfriend. I was jealous of the boyfriend having the girlfriend, and I was devastated by this. And so I went from being sort of like trying to hide my sexuality to thinking, why on earth have I been given this message that this is the most awful thing on earth? So I was then I wanted to find out more about myself and other people who are gay.
I'm Evie, I'm 18, I identify as bisexual, cisgender. So this was in 2020, so I was 14, and I think that was a time when lots of people kind of explored their sexuality and gender. I think just one day I was like, oh, the girls are like that too, and it was kind of just that. And then I was just like, oh, cool. And then after a few months I was like, that's the label I want. Told my friends, who are all great, because everyone else is already kind of gay. And then told my parents, and I was chill as well. So it was different to other people's. I was lucky, lots of nice people, and it was a very easy experience. It kind of just clicked in my head, and I didn't overthink it too much.
My name is Danielle, and my pronouns are she, her. I identify as straight and cisgender. Currently, my job is as a pastor and an activist, focusing specifically on LGBT communities' inclusion in the church and also related social justice issues. But it took me quite a lot of my adult life to get to this point. I suppose early on, going back to early 2000s, I had a friend come out to me as gay, and as an evangelical at the time, it really, I guess it messed with my assumptions, and it started a long journey of study and thinking, and it really shifted the way that I thought about queer people and queer communities.
When I was still at school, my dad saying to me that there was a tennis player who had been a man. So I was curious about this, and I had two wants when I went to sleep, that I would wake up A as a man and B as a Vulcan. I was into Star Trek. So I think I must have vaguely been aware that there were trans people around, or that it was humanly possible to be a trans person. But I didn't really know much about that. And then, I think things like non-binary, it's very much more recent, as far as I can remember, that I became aware of people who identified as non-binary. In fact, I went to a museum exhibition in Birmingham with my partner, and there was a list of these like 50 or so different sexualities you could be on the thought, and we just looked at each other and said, we don't know anything, do we? It's like, you know, the world's moved on.
I've really appreciated getting to know particularly trans women and non-binary folks because of how they've made me shift and change in how I perceive my own gender as a woman. Like it's caused me to really think, like, how do I see myself? How do I identify? What does it look like for me to be feminine in the ways that I lead and interact with the world? Is that how I see myself? And I decided, yes, it was, but it was also really a helpful thing for me to see, to kind of take that trans experience and apply it to myself in terms of how I thought about the ways in which gender influences my life and the way of relating.
For a long time, I only thought of it in terms of sexuality. I didn't really think about it in terms of gender, and of course those two we talk about much more now than we did. I mean, I was never happy being a girl. Men have far more power, men seem to have far more choice, certainly. Again, you look back to the 70s, we had to do different subjects than the boys.
I certainly think that as there's been more conversation about trans inclusion and the backlash to a greater awareness of what always was, which we look at, trans people have always existed. Trans people have always been part of culture and society across, you know, the world's experience. And yet in the last decade or so, as that's become more the topic of conversation, it's been really interesting and horrifying to see how culture and society has turned on trans folks.
There were other pivotal times in the past, the whole Section 28.
Many people are still fairly confused about Section 28. What's your objection to it?
Well, it's now law, and the law starts off by saying that a local authority shall not intentionally promote homosexuality. I don't approve of this because, A, I don't think sexuality of any sort can be promoted. I don't think you can convert anyone to heterosexuality or to homosexuality. But it's worse than just the law itself. It's the feeling that it spreads through a society which is made up of minorities of all sorts, whether they're blacks or Greeks or Jews or homosexuals. And all these minorities belong to the same society. It's the differences in our society which make it wonderful. And for a government to begin to pick out one of those minorities and suggest that they are in some way inferior, to spread suspicion and therefore fear, I think is a dangerous thing for the community as a whole. So I will go on fighting this law until it's actually repealed.
Seeing people's reactions to women and queer women just doing very normal things and just the immediate like, you suck, or like, that's stupid, or like making fun of it, has just irritated me so deeply. Like, especially like Chaperone recently. People aren't just hating on her for her, it's because she's a queer woman who's doing lots of good, making music about being a queer woman. And I think it kind of clicked in my head like, oh, there's meaning towards that more than just we hate on this person for fun.
There are people who have done a tremendous amount for changing attitudes, and I think the media, who get knocked so much for so many things, by bringing into our homes stories of all sort of queer people, stories of their everyday lives, have done a huge amount to change what society thinks and feels. You know, their stories go far beyond the gay community and kind of give other people insight to the fact that we are ordinary human beings, which I think has made a huge difference to how we get treated.
I think, you know, it's really interesting having conversations with people that are, you know, I'm 50, and having conversations with people that are both older and younger than me in terms of the change in language. I remember when I was a teenager, like in the early 90s, that someone would come out as gay or lesbian, and then that would be it. It was like there was a sense of a firmness in that language, and almost like okay, that's the identity you have to fully embrace, and there's no going back from that. And it totally makes sense, but at the same time, I feel like where culture has evolved to, and where queer communities have evolved to with more fluidity around language, is really, really healthy.
I think language is important, I think, to lots of people, but to me, it's something where I think it's really up to the person. I think labels can be really important to people, having a firm label on what you are, like gender or sexuality. I'm like, if you have really firm label on that and that really is important to you, I'm like, that's great. But I know there are some people who just don't want any labels. They kind of describe themselves just however they want to, and I also think that's fine. I think sometimes people think it should be one or the other.
That language, being able to name their feelings and their experience, I think is incredibly healthy. A lot of people don't exactly know, and just to be able to start to articulate in words that are seen as fluid and that can evolve to change in response to your own thinking and your experience, I think is great.
I think just as a young person kind of looking at older queer people, I think we need to cut them some slack, because they're not gonna understand everything that we understand. Obviously they were, you know, alive and being queer during times that were so much harder, and I think we should just respect them, listen to them, and just kind of, you know, take away from their stories.
My friendships and my relationships with queer people have completely transformed my spirituality, my sense of God, my sense of how I look at the world. For me, being pushed to see the gospel and to see God and the church through a lens of a queer person, as a marginalized experience, made me recognize my faith in all new ways.
I think the gift that queerness brings to the world is just joy. I think I've just found so much joy.
For me, once I realised that I didn't have to fit into society's way of being a woman, being a wife and all those sorts of things, it kind of meant that you kind of tore down all the walls and rebuilt them as you wanted to.
It's just really nice to be part of a little community that's, you know, reasonably kind to everyone. There's issues, but, you know, there's people who accept me for me, and that's all I'd really want.